Today, we are going to be talking about power platform patterns in local and federal government. I'm Brendan Hancock, and I'm joined here by my colleague today, Brendon Colburn. We both happen to be MTC technical architects, in addition to sharing the same name.
Yeah, amongst other things, we have a funny history.
The Microsoft Technology Centers are locations where you can go in to have immersive and innovative experiences across the Microsoft platform. We happen to specialize in the business application stack, and really cool job because we get to experiment with all of these new things that are happening at Ignite moments after they get announced. So one of the coolest cutting edge jobs out there at Microsoft if you happen to be looking for employment within. Today's agenda, we're going to be talking a little bit about local government challenges and how, in many ways, power platform patterns are corresponding to those specific challenges that they're seeing. I'll be doing a little bit of a demonstration of some of these technologies that I'm mentioning, and then we'll be handing it over to Mr. Colburn here to talk about the federal government and do some demonstrations around the stuff he's seeing at a national level. So, New York City and state has a lot of initiatives right now around reducing costs all up. Agencies are being asked to cut expenses 3% this year and 4.75% in 2023. This is an extremely big pinch to these government agencies that are already dealing with inflation. Not only is this a challenge for these agencies from a monetary-based perspective, but they're also running into talent issues and skill gaps. Currently speaking, the government, or well, actually, this is the end of summer statistic here, 7.9% of open jobs in New York City agencies. So a large talent gap. And to compound that challenge, there's also many open private sector roles in the New York City area that have a potential to offer more competitive salaries potentially, or in the IT sector, often sorts of hybrid or remote working opportunities that's making it more and more difficult for these entities, these agencies, to be able to meet the demand of all the work that they're seeing. We see a lot of legacy infrastructure in terms of on-premises tech stacks within many of these different agencies. And some of this infrastructure goes back 20, 30, sometimes even like 50 years, depending on which agency you might be talking to. In many ways, there's ways that Power Platform can tap into certain aspects of this, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the coming moments. But with this employee exodus and also a pending $10 billion budget gap by 2026, I think it stands without saying New York City and New York State are definitely being pushed to do more with less. With that in mind, we see a lot of different power platform patterns within these government entities. One thing to kind of caveat is that Power Platform is a marketing umbrella that rests above many different services below it. So when we talk about Power Platform, we're talking about loosely 3 different subject areas: analytics, applications, and automations. We have multiple other services below that that people leverage within Power Platform, but it's an important distinction that there's multiple technologies that are in this ecosystem. What we've been seeing historically was business applications tended to be built directly on top of the Dynamics case management system in a lot of these government agencies. So they were taking a conventional, well built out and very mature customer service module application, and they were doing extensibility to it for the purposes of meeting what a particular organization needed to do. So custom columns, custom tables of information, but largely built on a very robust back-end application. What I've seen is a dramatic change in the past few years to leveraging model-driven applications as a microservice, which means that instead of leveraging a large, complex, mature case management system that might have dozens of tables and capabilities that might not get leveraged, a lot of organizations have basically been taking a straightforward approach towards building very simple applications that might only include one or two tables of information for the purposes of storing that inside of a backend database that then could be used as to process an application. And I'll show some capabilities around that that makes that particularly enticing for city agencies that might have the ability or desire to interact with that in kind of an Excel-like format way. We've recently seen AI Builder and forms processing being put into the Power Automate capabilities stack, and it's built on top of some cognitive services APIs that rest over in Azure. But having the ability to basically take a standardized paper form and ingest data elements from various fields and tables and columns from one of those forms, it can shave off a lot of manual labor in terms of how people process data and enter it into underlying systems that might not have an API or might have an API depending on whether or not they're relatively new or whether anybody bothered to write an API for them. Beyond that, we're also seeing a lot of these organizations take advantage of collaborative Power Automate flows that are often just templatized and readily available within the Power Automate service. So a lot of taking connectors and capabilities that might leverage data entry from an Excel spreadsheet or a web portal or something like that, or even triggering flows based on emails and entering information attachments into SharePoint lists are very common nowadays, to the point where there's not even necessarily IT required backing to make those types of automations happen and real. Within the ecosystem of Power Platform, we also have an on-premises data gateway. And that on-premises data gateway can be installed on a local machine that will give organizations the ability to do Power BI connectivity, so to build analytics on on-premises data stores, such as SQL environments or even just Excel spreadsheets. So that's a very common theme as well. In addition, that on-premises gateway is the same piece of infrastructure required for us to do cloud-based flows that might tap into an on-premises data source as well. So being able to go and do automations on, again, something like a SQL environment on premises. Anecdotally, we also have an RPA-based tool that no longer requires that gateway, but I haven't been seeing much of that in government just yet. So robotic process automation might be a little bit taboo within government entities, but it's also something that could be taken advantage of perhaps more in the coming years. We are seeing also, again, back in the context of particularly these call centers that have been around for many, many years, a lot of emphasis on putting artificial intelligence capabilities in front of the call center, such as virtual agents or such as listening types of tools that allow you to be able to detect sentiment on audio calls and things like that. A little bit more in the exploration phase right now, but definitely something that seems like it's on the near-term horizon here, doing more with less once again. This is definitely something kind of that I want to point out as well, is that there's often challenges in understanding how to assign, associate licenses, and often segment those with different sorts of environments and different sorts of chargeback models. The couple of entities around New York are owned by both the government as well as the city. So for example, the Department of Education might be getting budget from two different locations, and there's confusion that arises for certain aspects of that. And then last but not least, and this is one that I'm going to devote a little bit about towards the end of this, is that there's a really big appetite to be able to stand up pretty straightforward constituent and or customer facing portals for a lot of these agencies in order to do straightforward data entry or monitoring some sort of an application or process as well. But every single agency that wants to do this has to go in and consider an overarching security posture for it. How do we authenticate those users? And then once we've authenticated them, how do we pass them into data that they're explicitly authorized to go be able to see? How do we segment one user from another user? These are all things that have been thematic when we're talking about these new Power Pages that we've been discussing. So I'm going to get out of the deck here for just 1 second and start going and showing you what I mean by all of this. So, ooh, little monkey. We've got right here, maker.powerapps environment right here. And as I was trying to say, there tends to be this notion now that you can go out and go spin up your own isolated database inside of one of these environments. So instead of having a large, complex CRM implementation, you have capacity. And if you have capacity for data, you can go create your new environment for your own bespoke purpose and agency. What you end up with then is people going into these environments and starting to create very, very straightforward, both model-driven and canvas-driven applications. Again, if I go now look at one of these applications, a model-driven application, you're going to see up in that top left-hand corner, Dynamics 365 and the URL crm.dynamics.com. But what we ended up creating here is a very, very quick and simple application that has the ability to have forms layered on top of it, have views built inside of it, so that you can go and create the specific columns that you need to create in order to have an application to interact with a table of data. And again, you could have multiple tables of data as well, but something very, very quick that could be built in a matter of minutes. With what drop-down menus you have, with what entities that you're looking for, so that you have that inside of an application that then can be interacted with different sorts of views. And these type of applications, highly configurable. You can go in here and add the columns that you want to build an application that more or less looks like a tabular model. Apply this, and then all of a sudden, there we go. We've created our own tabular application in a matter of minutes. The reason I see a lot of government entities interacting with this is that it also has the ability to be interacted directly with Excel. If you want to have people go in and enter data and fork it off to an email, have it come back to them, it's a very simple export and import process from this application that you've built, again, in kind of just a matter of moments. So that's one, microservice-based applications. Number two is AI builder and forms processing. If you go out to one of these government websites like the Department of Buildings here, you're going to see just nested stacks of different forms that you can download. I went ahead and downloaded one of these forms earlier today, and I built an artificial intelligence model on top of it. So inside of this document processing model, I've gone ahead and uploaded 5 of these forms from the Department of Building website. Give this a moment to load. What you can see here is that I've gone ahead and mapped out a handful of different fields that I wanted to extract from these forms so that I could pull the values out of handwritten text or typed text from something like a PDF or something like a JPEG document in order to build an AI model and pull the data out of it, a name, an address, a number. I can even pull out tables and check marks nowadays. So let me go ahead and upload a sample of one of these right here, and let's see what it does. I'm analyzing a New York City-based application form for an affidavit, and it's going to go ahead and analyze the fields that I've spelled out for you. And as quick as that, I've gone ahead and pulled an address out of an image, pulled a name out of an image, pulled another state and zip out of an image. And I could have gone further and done more and more of this, but names, companies, addresses of companies to ship to. You can leverage AI models like this to take data and put them into any underlying system that has an API. And if you want to go play with this, you can even go take a look down here in Power Automate right now. There's a document automation tab that you see there at the bottom that will even help you do that with robotic process automation. So if you want to or need to enter data into an on-premises system like a mainframe that doesn't have an API, we've got tools for you to go explore and experiment with that right now. Above and beyond these AI capabilities, and I almost always see these AI capabilities in the context of automations, we have all these connectors. You can go ahead and explore the templates here in terms of what connectors are available to you, but we have, I believe, over 800 different API-based connectors that you can tap into to do things like running sentiment analysis on text that comes from somewhere, or entering data into some sort of underlying SQL database. Sky's the limit. With these, they also have the ability to tap into RPA-based connectors too. And again, that's something I've seen a lot in government just yet, but the opportunity seems like it's something that should be considered if you can't build an API for a system, particularly for legacy systems like a COBOL system that needs to be interacted with. One of the kind of last things that I'll pick a nod to is just kind of showing you that recently we've also debuted this whole Power Pages construct. It's kind of the evolution of the Power Portal solution that we've got. And this is like a configurable editor right here where you can go in and start building out configurations on the fly. And as you can see up in the top right-hand corner there, you can even go out and edit the code if you want to go do extensibility in Visual Studios directly. Inside this particular one, I've gone ahead and thrown an iframe in there as well, some summary information, make sure that we're syncing here. But this sort of thing allows an organization to very quickly launch a portal-based application that resides on the Dataverse, which is the same place that I was editing the data inside of the application that I had seen right there. So again, get data from an external portal into an application, very common use case, very desirable. And you can basically configure these and launch them and test them immediately. So significantly faster speed to market in terms of application creation for those external facing portals. It's going to launch right here. You see that my configurations have changed for it. I can still see my iframed mouse. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and put in a form that allows me to enter columns of data, fields of data back into that backend system. I won't spend too much more time showing you the capabilities of this because the thing that I keep running into that's a thematic challenge with this type of an architecture is when organizations or agencies have to go in and set up authentication and identity providers for these. We provide out-of-box structures and templates for this for a handful of types of providers. So you can obviously see your LinkedIn's, Google's, Facebook's, Twitter's, Microsoft accounts in here. But more often than not, you will find that government entities have some sort of an authentication backend that you need to interact with. And often those are also legacy systems. So if you have to go interact with an LDAP system or a SAML-based system, or maybe some older version of an on-premises Active Directory, more often than not, that's going to be set up through Azure Active Directory B2C, which is very much a developers-based environment inside of Azure. So we run into a lot of complexities when we need to go do extensible integrations into external authentication providers. So that's kind of it for my section. This is what I've been seeing a lot of, and it's certainly been an interesting kind of transition away from just conventional case management. I will yield over the time to my friend and colleague here, Brendon Colburn, and bring back up the slides here for a moment so you can talk a little bit about the federal government.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll start at the bottom of my slide deck here and say pretty much everything that my esteemed colleague mentioned in regards to state and local government also applies to the federal government from what I've seen. Automation scenarios, wanting to have things externally facing through a portal. These are things that I'm seeing as trends and things that people are trying to accomplish for the federal government as well. Now, I've also seen a lot of use cases for request management, whether it be a travel request, a training request, a request for approval, a lot of approval processes I'm seeing in the federal government, for various business processes. I'm also seeing more and more moving, thank God, away from over-engineered SharePoint applications. So I've seen a lot of that in the space. SharePoint's a great tool. A SharePoint list is an awesome way to track data. But once you start trying to turn it into a relational data model, there be dragons. So, I help kind of guide my customers through ways to re-envision things that they've engineered on SharePoint into Dataverse so that they have less technical debt and less headaches. I've seen interest in dynamic rendering of questionnaires, not just in the federal government, but, they're particularly interested because federal government has a lot of forms, and I actually had a session yesterday for my shapeshifter control, which is kind of like an advanced use case of Power Apps component framework and Canvas apps that accomplishes some of this use case. I've seen like different groups within the federal government trying to do inspections and wanting to do offline capabilities. And like not only just offline from, like your phone with like a mobile Canvas app, but also wanting offline capabilities through a laptop experience. And I believe, Jamie, who's been, our third participant on the chat, I think he actually joined me in a session on this very topic. And I have a demo that I can show in regards to this. I've seen a lot of, connecting to on-prem infrastructure on networks. This is along the same lines as what I was saying in the chat when somebody was asking about, hey, how can we connect to, our on-prem AD? And, I don't have an answer to that, unfortunately. But for the on-prem SQL, I have seen that kind of stuff can work. And also on-prem for, I've seen with a government customer using on-prem to get behind their firewall so that you can start interacting with stuff on your own intranet, whether you have an API on your intranet, et cetera. They were using a custom connector and on-prem data gateway for that. I've seen, that governance and center of excellence is a prerequisite for OIT buy-in with any like agency in the federal government. There will be a lot of excitement with people within, the different agencies, but ultimately before anything moves forward, I've had to have, governance sessions with all of these different centralized IT groups to, give them confidence that it's not the Wild West. There was a comment in the chat at one point, DLP, laugh out loud. I might be partly to blame for that because I've made sure that a lot of these different federal government groups had a good blanket policy in place to make sure that maybe to say it one way, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, we still secure it. So there's exclusionary policies in place at a lot of these agencies to make sure that, if a new trial environment or dev environment gets stood up, it's not going to have very good DLP, in its favor. You're going to have to, make a request to get your own environment with DLP on it to get the extra levels of connectivity. So sorry if I'm partly to blame for that. Yeah, so those are the key kind of concepts, themes, trends that I've seen in the federal government industry lately. And I have 2 demos that I can showcase based off of what I was talking about. I have a demo in regards to the training request management, and I have a demo in regards to inspections that I'll do next. And also, I'll just throw in in the chat, we were talking about plugs and how Jamie's allowed to do plugs. I'm allowed to do plugs too. So I put in my a blog from Medium that I posted a while back. And this is kind of like the story behind the inspection scenario that I'll share momentarily. So let me share my screen. Also, there was a question in the chat at one point about if we were going to get into environment stuff. And I just wanted to bring up like a common thing that I whiteboard out with my customers within the, both in commercial industry and the federal government. This is kind of how I outline environment strategy on a whiteboard. It looks more compelling when I draw it on a whiteboard, but I don't have a whiteboard available to me right now. So talking environment strategy, at the highest level, you have your Office 365 tenant. And your Office 365 tenant comes with the default environment. Microsoft is saying, hey, we recommend that you change the name of this thing to personal productivity so that people think of it properly as, just a place where I'm doing basically just my Office 365 stuff. So, within this environment, you get Canvas apps, you get flows, you might get Dataverse if you turn it on. or whoever has that level of access to turn on the default for a federal agency turns it on. And you can get solutions. It's available to everyone, and it should have the strictest policy across your whole tenant, ideally. So like just Office 365 connectors is what I often recommend. Now, the next strategy is to have an enterprise environment strategy where, enterprise IT has dev, test, QA, and prod. At the dev and the test are for, dev and test users. The QA and the prod is potentially for all users, but the idea is that you're kind of like using the sharing mechanisms with model-driven apps and Canvas apps so that people just see, the things that they're supposed to see within that enterprise construct. We're seeing in this space that it might be a little bit less strict. You might turn on a few more connectors, but still it's like not super open per se. Within this construct, I've seen oftentimes that, the data burst for enterprise will be wired up with portals, what we're now calling Power Pages, to Azure B2B or Azure B2C with login.gov, external users into that enterprise construct. I'm then seeing that environments often get shown within or get set up within a project construct. And it's actually like the most common thing that I saw in the federal government back when I was implementing solutions for the Department of Justice and other agencies, is that, you would start a project based off of the contract to implement this use case for program office X. So, in that scenario, you may get your own dev, test, QA, and maybe even a prod environment to build out your solution, if you're lucky. I have this prod in dots in this one scenario because one customer brought up the idea that, hey, best case scenario, maybe we don't have a production environment for these project specific scenarios, and we use solutions to migrate things back through the pipeline to ultimately be in our enterprise construct, saving the need to have like a whole bunch of extra environments. Now, you can do this, but you have to keep in mind DLP. So if your project has DLP that needs additional connectors to what's lit up in enterprise, you might be able to get enterprise to change their DLP to add that stuff. But if you can't, then that's the reason why you would have a production environment within your project specific space. And the last strategy that I'm often seeing for an environment strategy, and I'm hoping that this is helpful for people online. I heard that one person who said, hey, are we going to talk about this? And I'm hoping it's landing at least for you. Is org specific. Maybe marketing has dev, test, staging, and prod so that they can use the Twitter connector or other social media connectors. Maybe IT has their own environment so they can connect with Azure DevOps or Jira or other ticketing systems. So that's often like what I'm seeing in that space. I took this away from my whiteboard. I didn't want to show the whiteboard itself because it, I guess, gave a little bit of sensitive information about who the customer was. But there's that. Now to my demos, and I guess, Mr. Hancock, let me know if there's any questions bubbling up in the chat as I'm going through this stuff. But
there's a lot, but I think that we'll do the Q&A at the end.
Okay, cool. So let me go ahead, and I have an environment here, and in it I have something called a solution called training request management. So I did this in a 2-day hackathon with one-to-many federal government customers, and this is what bubbled to the top. And what's cool about it is it's a showcase of how rapidly you can build out some of this stuff. Because, really, I only had a day and a half to build it, and I was getting peppered with questions along the way because people were learning. So I, actually like that. So this solution has a series of tables in it that track information about training requests and expenses mainly. And I have an app built out in it, which is a model-driven app. And I'll go ahead and play the app. And in this app, I have a dashboard that starts things that lets me know where things are in the process of getting approved as far as training requests are concerned. I can go to my training requests and I can see existing training requests and I can add a new training request. And this training request I'll call showing Ignite a federal gov scenario. I can say, oh, this is starting today. If I say multiple days, I have a business rule, so I didn't have to write any code. This is, so no JavaScript. It's a no-code solution. It makes it so that my end date shows when I select multiple days, and I can provide that, and I can save. Now my training request. Now, another feature of Dataverse and model-driven apps is I have a calculated field. So it did the date diff between the start and the end date. What I can do next is I can add a expense to this training request. One of those things that just works a lot better in Dataverse and model-driven apps, in my opinion, in a lot of people's opinions, than SharePoint. So I can go in and I can say this expense is that I had Chipotle with my boss, Ed Hild, earlier today. And I don't know, it's probably like $12 or something. And I needed that, to have energy to train you guys today. So I can add that expense. I can update another feature of Dataverse and Power Platform that's no code, a roll-up field. And now you'll see that I rolled up the expenses cost to my training request total cost. Now, pay attention to the business process flow at the top here. Initiation, first level approval, HR, and ultimately approving or rejecting these training requests. This was done without any code, again. And what I can do is I can add another expense. I'll call it a Surface Hub 2 80-inch display. This goes under other. I don't sell these. I don't know exactly how much they cost, but I know that they are expensive. Let's say $10,000. Let's say, I really felt like I needed this Surface Hub 2 80-inch display to give you guys the best experience, maybe draw out that environment strategy just right, but I didn't have it here, so I'm requesting it as the expense. Now, when I recalculate, $10,012 for the total cost, but you'll also see, without any code, in just real time, the control updated at the top here to say, hey, Brendon, now that you've gone over the cost threshold, you're going to need executive review to get this training request approved. So that's the front end of this demo. What I'll now show is that I can move forward in the business process flow. So I can go from initiation to first level approval to HR. And now because I've moved to HR, something special has happened on the back end. So if I go back to my solutions, we'll see in my training request management solution in Dataverse, I have cloud flows, and I have a cloud flow called the backend approval workflow. Wow, my browser died. It's a new one. Only when you're demonstrating live, right?
The demo gods are not on your side.
Yeah, womp womp.
Should have done it from a Surface.
Yeah, I should have done a Surface. You're right. Surface device wouldn't have done that ever. All right. So, but I have it loaded back up pretty quickly. Sorry for the inconvenience, everybody. You'll see that I get a dashboard of my Power Automate flow. And in the run history, I have something that ran 42 seconds ago and is still running. So what I like about that is I can drill into it and I can see my flow currently running. And so the first step in Power Automate is a trigger. The request approval process updated. So I got additional details from a related table, the stages, to find that my current stage is HR. And I have a switch statement that because I'm currently at the HR stage, I want to kick off and start and wait for an approval. So ultimately what that looks like, I could show this in Outlook. but I'm going to show it in Teams because Teams is pretty neat. So if I go into my activity within Teams, you'll see that just a few minutes ago, I received a request to do HR approval here of this training request. And I will say, yeah, sure, Brendon, why don't you spend all the company's money? You know, nothing like a little bit of dry humor in a demo. So I submit that, I approve it. Now, if I go back to Power Automate Flow, you'll see in pretty much real time, I get green check marks across the board. My flow ran successfully. I got details about that throughout the steps, and ultimately I update the row in Dataverse, specifically the description field. So then what that looks like on the front end is if I go back to my training request and I refresh the data, you'll see that I said, this was approved, here are the comments. Yeah, sure, Brendon, why don't you spend all the company's money? So this was a scenario that I built out really rapidly with several federal government agencies, and it was kind of a hit. So I show it all the time to other customers. Now, the other demo that I want to show briefly was the inspection scenario and how it kind of enables offline capabilities as well. So I will open up. Are you guys able to see my screen still? It's a
Yes.
Power App of inspections.
Yes.
Awesome. So you'll see I'm paralleling into Windows 11 from my silly MacBook. And I am using the new Power Apps, or somewhat new Power Apps Windows app that you can get from the Microsoft Store. And one of the key features of it is that I can open up model-driven apps and I can view things in an offline mode, and I can make changes before then going back to online mode and syncing my changes. So this would, and the other concept at play here is, okay, so we were keeping track of some key inspection information, like the type, and then ultimately, this is actually using Power Apps Component Framework. So part of like what you'll see in the blog article that I posted in the chat was that part of this hackathon was that they had a dynamic questionnaire that they wanted to render out, and they wanted to be able to do it offline. And I proved out that they could do that using this capability of embedding a PCF control into a offline hosted model-driven application. So, I can go through and I can enter in my changes, and I can then go back and change back from, well, let's add one more change just to make sure I'm showing all the cool stuff. Okay, so I'll go back and change back to online mode. And now I'm back in an online capability. I think what I did with the offline profile is I made it read only, and that's why I wasn't able to add changes in offline mode. That's a configuration change that you can do pretty easily. All of this works in the GCC. So, I was seeing a lot of questions in the chat, like, does this work in GCC? Does that work in GCC? Everything that I demoed in these two demonstrations are GCC approved. With that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen because that's my two demos. And I guess, Mr. Hancock, we're going to open up the floor for questions.
Yep, 5 minutes of Q&A. So you can type them into chat. I don't know whether we have the ability to just unmute people at random, but if you raise your hand, we can try to unmute you with the little icon reactions button that we've got there.
Yeah, so I'm seeing Jennifer Kimball was mentioning, really wish the approval widget allowed for more. It does. So like when you add the approval into Power Automate, you can say it's like a wait to respond, but you can also say wait to respond with custom responses, and you can put in additional responses in there. So it doesn't just have to be yes, no. You can add your additional responses. Aaron, oh, go ahead, Mr. Hancock.
I was just gonna say, do you want to stop sharing your screen so we could to like face to face with folks?
What was that?
I'm seeing your screen. Did you just want to stop sharing your screen?
Oh, I thought it's saying on my end that I stopped sharing.
Oh, interesting. I'm still seeing it. Whatever. You do things this way.
Nice. That's good to hear, Jennifer. I saw that Aaron was asking, is this also GCC High approved? I know that my first demo was GCC High approved. I don't know about the second one. And also, just to be transparent, when I got the adaptive card right within Teams, I think at least in GCC High, adaptive cards they might not be there yet. So it just takes you an extra step. So it'll take you to Power Automate and you answer it there. It's not really that big of an inconvenience, but I just want to be transparent there. Lewis was asking, how did I get started with business process flows? It's just another configurable thing within solution management. So it now rolls under Power Automate, actually. You create one and you have a WYSIWYG editor where you add your stages and you associate it with a given Dataverse table and provide a couple other key details. And then when you save and you activate it, it will show up on model-driven app forms. Mr. Hancock, you're on mute now, I think. And Isaiah, looks like you have a question. Do you want to post it in the chat? Or actually, you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the presentation. I was trying to do like a Power Automate using Dataverse. And every time I go in there and try to like upload a file or image, I don't see that option at all. And mine tells me that it's Dataverse legacy. I'm not sure why. Any help on that?
So so you're uploading an image like from where? Are you uploading it like when you test the flow, or are you uploading it from an app that then fires the flow? Or is it uploading to a SharePoint list?
It's an attachment that comes from an email. So when a new email arrives, I create an item and then I take the attachment from the email to add it to the Dataverse record.
Yeah. So what I've found with that is that you have to play around a little bit with the different base 64 methods that exist within Power Automate. I don't remember exactly which one you need to use. There's like 3 different ones. So try a couple of the base 64 conversions on that attachment, and one of them will work to insert it into Dataverse. But you also have to know where you're inserting it. So like the 2 places that you can put it in Dataverse is either a file type data column on a data table, or you can add it into the attachments table, the notes attachments table, and associate it with the given record.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, they took me out of attendee mode, so I'm back. Were there any last questions before we wrapped up? All right. Well, if there's nothing else, then we hope that you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. And wherever you are, we hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.